Well, in that case, McKeever, thank you for being here. Let's
Thanks.
run it. I guess let's just start off with the basics, man. I want to know about what it was like for you growing up and going to shows and just getting involved in music in general.
Yeah, so I was born in Manhattan. And when I was 2 and my sister was born, my parents sort of moved out to the suburbs in Connecticut. I don't know, as soon as I sort of became aware of music when I was like 11 and I started playing guitar, and before that I was, into rollerblading and skateboarding, so that sort of got me into like the idea of counterculture, I guess, because there's fashion, whether it was wearing the Jinkos and the chain wallets, and then, you'd listen to like The Offspring or Green Day or like Blink-182 or all these sort of bands. And then I got tendonitis in my knees when I was really young, and so they told me I couldn't skate anymore, and I was really like upset about that. And so I found guitar like later that year when I was 11. And then I just started listening to all types of things and started going to shows in the city, seeing bands like Interpol. This is more when I was like 13, 14, or Mogwai, or a little bit later than that, I got into like more underground punk stuff like the Blood Brothers. At the drive-in, at the drive-in had broken up, so I saw like the Mars Volta on like their first and second album tour. And so yeah, I became pretty obsessed with that. And then in high school, I guess that kind of took a backseat because I got super busy. But one of the things I got more busy with was starting my own bands. I was lucky to go to a high school where they had like a lot of really talented musicians. So, I was doing jazz band, guitar, I was doing choir. And then I had my own sort of like alternative, like indie punk, noise rock bands. And we'd practice in my parents' attic and drive people crazy and gig around and all that.
Well, here's what's so crazy because like I could probably like go off on the fact that I think you and I share a lot of the same reference points. Like for
Sure.
sure, there's no doubt about that. But here's the thing: you grew up in Manhattan, which is pretty impressive for those of us pretty much who grew up outside of a city and kind of experienced
Well,
counterculture
I
and like
moved when
you
I
know.
was like 2,
Okay, fair enough.
but only like, an hour drive. So I was able to like, if I planned out and like begged my parents, they would take me to see a show. Like
Yeah, for sure.
well, it was still like accessible, but I did have a suburban kind of experience too. So it was like,
So you had both. Okay. Got it. So before we even touch on Heavy Halo, could you brought up the Blood Brothers, and I feel like that's a very unique touch point because for people who are of that era, they were this iconic band, like for example, like the Blood Brothers or shit, it's not coming to me now. But touch on the Blood Brothers for a second, if you could, and how that inspired you, and maybe if you've ever been to any of their shows,
yeah, I've seen them actually 5 times.
which is wild.
3 times in the original lineup, and then I mean, it's still the same lineup, but they did several reunion runs, one like 8 years ago, and then one this past year, which was incredible. Yeah, I mean, I got into them because I was into like, I got into like Thursday, and then like At the Drive-In and like Sunny Day Real Estate, and then, heavier stuff like Converge and whatnot. And then the Blood Brothers I just thought were like really fucking awesome because they were super chaotic and intense, but also they weren't macho and like broy.
Hmm.
Like I grew up with like a lot of bros, sports bros, lacrosse bros, just and I didn't want anything to do with that. So anything that was like anti that I was down with, And there were a lot of like homophobic people in the Blood Brothers. They were very like, and there was all this ambiguity of whether the two singers were dating or not, like no one knew. And I thought that was like part of the lore and like part of what attracted me to it. It was, so yeah.
It was wild. Okay, so that segues. So we're kind of coming from post-hardcore. Let's move into
Yeah.
the electronic side of things. So obviously super, super influenced by post-hardcore, but where's the digital side of things come into play? Nine Inch Nails, Smashing Pumpkins.
Well, I took a very weird route into electronic music. So the more I got into like studying music in high school, I was, doing jazz band and choir, and I got really into like classical music. And I actually went to Columbia to study English and classical music in the city. So I finally got to like go to the city and be in the city. And I've been there pretty much since, with a few years here or there. So there wasn't really like a rave scene or anything in my high school, like at all. It was all like live music, or people liked some people liked hip hop, or, there were maybe like a couple ravers, so I didn't really know much about it, but like, I was into like bands like, Radiohead, and that sort of led to like Bjork and, Aphex Twin and Autechre. And so I got into that kind of stuff like IDM and, whatever. And then I sort of like took this tangent into like writing chamber pop and like trying to orchestrate stuff for like strings and all this. And then I sort of got more into electronic music because I realized that it was like a pain in the ass trying to get all these people into like one place. So it's like, wow, if I can do all this kind of stuff on my own on a laptop, or like, I used to home record a lot, but the technology got so much better. I learned Ableton, and my bandmate came out of electronic music, throwing raves in the Midwest, and he was like a techno DJ in the late 90s and playing drum and bass and things like this. So I sort of like grew into that from more like live music, and he kind of got into live music from the other end. So like Heavy Halo was kind of this meeting in the middle of that. And also I think, in New York in particular, post like EDM, there was sort of like an EDM was like the pop version of it, but sort of more of like the techno underbelly, and the underground got really popular in Brooklyn, and all these people were like ditching guitars for DJ decks, and it's like the LCD Sound System lyric about bands, like some of the bands are ditching the guitars for synths, some of them are ditching the synths for the guitars. It's ever flowing exchange. So I think I have like a good balance. And I mean, I like a lot of different types of music. So Heavy Halo is definitely trying to like combine stuff that maybe doesn't seem like it fits at first glance. That's sort of like part of the idea.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that idea. So let's talk about the beginnings of Heavy Halo. This notion of mixing human emotion with machine precision. When did this all begin, and what has that experience been like?
Yeah. I mean, so back to like maybe an artist I sort of referenced, like Bjork or Aphex Twin, or more recently bands like Death Grips, or Nine Inch Nails. Obviously, the thing that's really compelling to me about those groups is they all like have this really amazing ability to have some stuff be like super machine like and mechanical and detail oriented, but then they really leave in like a lot of raw vocal takes, or like chaos, or like noises that like a lesser artist would just edit out, like a big realization to me was my bandmate and I like went through a lot of stems from early Nine Inch Nails. Like you can literally just download stuff off of like, I don't know, Pirate Bay or whatever. And so that's basically the multi tracks, right? And so we went through the multi tracks for like that, a lot of stuff by Korn, and a lot of stuff by a lot of different artists. And what struck me about the Nine Inch Nails stuff was just he'll just leave in like a mistake, like something that you would consider like a mistake, like a bass noise, or a vocal, like a little extra noise that was in the recording. And I was like, this is true artistry. It's like, how to make things perfect, you still keep the like raw human emotion, and when to do which. And so that's like been a big part of like our process, is like, we hold ourselves to a really high standard. John's a mixing and mastering engineer. Like we want everything to sound very like high fidelity in a lot of ways, but then, we definitely try to keep it raw with like the vocals and the guitars and other aspects of it. So we're not just bleaching all that out. I mean, especially in an era where like AI music might become the norm, I think it's more important for humans and human musicians to like be comfortable with letting it be raw, and be comfortable with letting it be vulnerable, because that's like our only weapon now.
Yeah, no, that's sensible. I'd like for you to touch on that because, I'm not buying too much into the sensationalism behind AI. With every technological development, things get crazy. Who knows what the inevitable outcome is going to be, right? Will it replace humans? Look, I'm a designer. Will it replace me? Probably at this point. But I'd like to know, is that something that you embrace in both your artistry and maybe in your recording process?
I've never used it in music. We experimented with some AI images for a couple music, like lyric videos, but
Mhm.
I don't know. I like wasn't that maybe happy with the result. Maybe I have a little bit of regret about it. I don't know. I mean, I have to, like, I mean, we tried
Yeah.
it out. We did a lyric video for every fucking song. And so we were like working our asses off and so we were trying a lot of different approaches. From a lot of stuff was made off found footage on YouTube. Like we did one of computer viruses, um, from the 90s because the song was called Failure and sort of about like, this sort of growing darkness within you. And so that, people seem to like that concept. And so I'd sort of be more into doing more stuff like that. But I guess for my opinion on the music side is like, there's a lot of really tedious editing processes, and vocal comping and compression, like all this stuff that's really fucking annoying to do. And the AI doesn't do the annoying stuff. It only wants to do the creative stuff, which is the fun. Like, why do I
Right.
want an AI to write lyrics? Like, that's fun and my chance to like get stuff off my chest. Like why can't it do the boring crap? Like,
I That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
so like maybe I could see it like helping with like, like if you have 12 vocals and you want them all this, consonants to align, like why do I have to do that manually? Why can't the AI do that part? So I
Like as an assistant.
yeah,
Yeah, of
right.
course.
It's clearly just doing the low hanging fruit of like,
Mhm.
like to me, like writing melodies is sacred, and to me, like writing lyrics is, I don't know, something I've been doing my whole life. Like I don't really see that stopping or wanting that to stop. So I don't really know. I mean, I think there's a lot of different uses of it and degrees, and I think everyone has a different line with what they're comfortable with.
Right.
So I guess it's sort of like to be determined, but like I would never, I mean, the same way I use samples, like I never use like a whole sample. I'm like chopping it up, unless it's like drums or something where it's like not that different from me like hiring a drummer to record a part, like live drums, but I still am always like chopping it and editing it. I would never use like a wholesale melody and make a track behind it. Like, if you're a rapper and you want to do that, like that's cool. If that's like what you want to do and that's what you're comfortable with, like all the power to you. But like to me, it's like putting my hands on these keyboards and these instruments I'm surrounded with is a huge part of like putting my fingerprints on the song. So yeah,
Good. Yeah, I haven't heard it articulated yet. I've yet to really have a conversation about AI, so I think you actually put it really eloquently, so I appreciate that. That is pretty
thanks.
cool.
I don't know. I feel like that was totally discombobulated, but hopefully,
No.
it made a little bit of sense. I don't know.
It does. It's just that dichotomy between having some basically like a machine intelligence that can assist you versus substitute your emotional creativity, which only comes from experience anyway. So, no, I totally hear you, which is interesting. So, let's segue to the new album. Fuck it. Let's talk about Damaged Dream.
For sure.
I want to know about the vision behind Damaged Dream.
Yeah. So our debut album, was a little bit trickier because we sort of defined our sound on that album. And then Damage Dream was sort of like, okay, let's see how far we can like sort of stay in this, playground, but like push it further and, like make it heavier, like in some parts, make it more beautiful in some parts, just like improve on all the production and the vocal recording and just push myself harder as a singer to like really like kind of view it almost like an actor delivering like lines. It's like some lines I'll whisper, then I'll like scream the next lines that'll be in between. And so like really getting into the minutia because it's like the macro stuff. A lot of that was figured out. Like we had a process, we lived together, we can give each other feedback really easily. We sort of like defined how we're working. So now we can like really zoom on the details and like push it. As far as the name, I wrote this song that didn't make the album and it's sort of like a Lucy that we don't really know what to do with, but it was about like my uncle's funeral and watching him being lowered in the ground and like how it sort of felt like the death of like this like idealism of like optimism in my family and to me. And so one of the lyrics was calling it a damaged dream. And that term really stuck with me. Number one, because it's like alliteration, like heavy halo, DDHH. And then secondly, it's all about contrast. So, heavy halo, where it's like two opposites. It's like you try to be good, but you get dragged down to hell. It's like you have this dream, it's damaged, but it's not dead. It's not over. It's just this kind of wounded, desperate energy. And, I think a lot of the like vocal performances and just my energy I put into it. It's like, okay, you're backed into a corner, like desperate times called for desperate measures. Like, can you sort of fight back and like overcome this? And the third album I'm writing now, or it's written, but I'm recording the vocals and it's pretty far along. But that's almost like the next step of it. It's like, can you transcend now that you've built up this like resilience? The first album was just despair. The second album, like it, first album is hell. Second album is purgatory. Third album is not really paradise, but there's more moments of like hope and transcendence. And I guess the word is resilience, where it's not like things are happening to you. You're still sort of in the shit, but you can deal with it a little better, and like fight back and sort of like overcome. So it's sort of been moving in that direction, I guess.
And what usually comes first for you? Do you feel like it's I think it's interesting because you're describing your working process, like you said, more like an artist, which is ironic, right? Because you would think, okay, a musician being an artist, but more like a fine artist, a visual artist. You're describing kind of those nuances and how you expect people to feel viscerally, maybe using their various senses. So when you're building out, let's say, a heavy halo track, what do you
Yeah.
want people to feel and experience maybe in those nuanced ways, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, just okay. Yeah, there's a couple things I can say about that. The first is bringing it down to the musical elements. Like, I have a lot of synths and drum machines and like 5 guitars around here, and John has more. And so a lot of it is playing around with a beat or a sound. And then, like there'll be some sort of musical building block. A lot of times it's a sound or a drum pattern or something that feels emotionally resonant. And then I sort of start vocalizing over that and like riffing into a microphone. And the longer I've done this, the more I can almost a lot of times I've been able to write like a whole track over like a beat, like first or second take. Like it doesn't happen all the time, but when it happens, it sort of flows out. And so I try to like cultivate that flow state and follow where like the emotion is leading me, because I know it's fleeting. And if I don't get it down and capture it, it will be gone. And like that moment in time will be gone. But like once the sort of the melodies are in place, a lot of detail work can be done to like change the lyrics, fit the syllables in, do different rhyme schemes, change the BPM of the track, change the sounds that are in the track. Like, but the initial like feeling has to be there. And to me, like, I just feel like every good song has a conflict in it, like the same way you watch a movie and you think about like someone coming up with a story, and there's a villain, there's an anti-hero, there's a hero, there's a side quest distraction, there's all these elements that make up the dramatic arc of a story. And while I'm not really that narrative of a songwriter, it's more of like, okay, each song has a concept that's like some sort of conflict. Like I was working on one today called The Dead Weight. That's a new song, and it's like about, basically cutting toxic people and things and parts of yourself out of your life. And so that has like a conflict in it, right? It's like it's painful to do that. Like growing and evolving is painful. Like, you watch a crab molt and like shed its
Yeah.
shell. If you watch a video of that, it looks like one of the most excruciating. Like I don't know what the crab is feeling, but the video looks very intense, or a snake shedding its skin, right? So like I was thinking about all these things, like in order to grow, you have to like sacrifice aspects, or have hard conversations with people in your life that you're not seeing eye to eye with anymore. And, so all these things are just embedded in that. And so once the lyric and sort of the melody are written, it just, as a vocalist, as a performer, that's almost a separate part of the process where it's almost like I'm not the director anymore. Like the director was the person who wrote the song. Now it's my job to interpret that and deliver that. And I have to, I'll lock myself in a room for like 4 hours per song to try and figure out how that's going to go.
Right.
And it's a lot of trial and error, like sometimes I'll go back, I'll be like, maybe I was like kind of too aggressive on this verse because you don't want to give it all away. And like this lyric is more sensitive and should be like pretty. And also like giving people whiplash, like taking them from like there's a lot of bands who do that, like a band like Deftones, for example, or like a singer like Billy Corgan or Kurt Cobain. It's like there's a lot of contrast and like chaos in their delivery, or the Blood Brothers, like And I think those kinds of dynamics are really fun and interesting and keep people, like, engaged in the song, you know?
I do, and you mentioned something interesting earlier, you spoke of concepts and, I mean, I wanna know conceptually what drove you perhaps in your past, whether it be video games, movies, certain things like that. Uh, I always find that super unique. Oftentimes you'll find an artist maybe was driven by could be Star Wars, it could be something
Yeah.
incredibly esoteric, and I would just love to know what some of your reference points are conceptually.
Well, actually bringing it back to the electronic music thing, like, before I got into more understanding rave music and listening to that and, getting really into drum and bass, especially, like, gold metalheads and, like, these stuff. Obviously, like, being a kid of the '90s, video games were, like, super huge, and I still game a fair amount and play a lot of vintage games, and a lot of those soundtracks, especially for things like Final Fantasy VII, a lot of that kind of cyberpunk, dark kind of stuff, and even stuff that's not as much dark, but just, like, pretty beautiful, like stuff for, like, Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VI or Earthbound, that sort of embedded itself into my mind. Zelda. So yeah, I mean, I think that sort of influenced me, and just sort of the atmosphere of those games. It's like, all these the music is tied to the visuals, which is tied to the game mechanics. It's like a very immersive idea. And I don't, we've definitely from the start of this band, like, we wanted to have a very clear visual identity. We wanted to do a lot of music videos. We knew that, like, a lot of people are just like, "Oh, just want to be a musician. I don't want to deal with that." Or, some bands that are like a garage rock band, they always put like a shitty flyer with like pizza on it or like whatever, like it's like very low effort, but and that's like
Mhm.
the aesthetic, you know?
I do.
Well, of it being like, I don't really care, it's DIY, it's like punk or whatever. But, like, I'm wearing a Black Flag shirt. They had the best iconography ever. Like, it doesn't like, they were very ambitious with their, I dare I say, branding, you know?
Sure. Yeah,
Like, it's
no,
like
and that's important.
it and so, like, that stuff was always really important to me, bands with a very clear visual aesthetic. We also have a lot of friends in the fashion world and friends in the graphic design world, and it's like, being in New York, it's like, how do we find a way to, like, do something cool with, like, everyone we know,
Of
like,
course.
so it's a natural kind of thing. I might have gotten
100%.
off track from the conflict situation, but
No,
that
no, that's
yeah,
totally relevant. Let's you know what? Let's take this as an opportunity to speak about fashion in that case. I'd love to
for
know just
sure.
your opinion. Like, it's like for a lot of people that don't necessarily need to be fashion heads to really appreciate what that conceptual nature of fashion brings to music. Obviously, the two are such in deep symbiosis with one another. Obviously, I would just like to just get your general take on fashion, maybe what inspires you, what has inspired your music. Fuck it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like some futuristic designers like KTZ or like Jun Jay, or obviously Rick Owens is awesome.
Has to
Um,
be, right?
I guess,
Has to
like,
be.
on the immediate there's this guy named Brian Whatever who has a brand called Whatever 21, and he's, like, a close friend of mine, and especially, like, early on, but, even to the present day, he does, like, a lot of our merch. He helped creative direct our videos and, like, styled us and has this really cool brand, and, it was just endlessly inspiring, and a lot of the stuff he references is, he loves Alice in Chains and Typo Negative.
Hell
So,
yeah. Yes.
being a '90s, like, metalhead and yeah, and, then into, like, new metal and corn and stuff, and so a lot of, like, the stuff he was putting on runways were, like, plaid kilts, kinda like a Jonathan Davis thing, so it's almost like, you know, the music inspires the fashion, which then inspires the music, and so just on a personal level, like, watching him work and just seeing his work ethic and, like, how much he created was definitely, like, an influence on our band. So, that kinda stuff, but I mean, as far as, like, Fashion Week and all that, like, I haven't been, like, that involved with anything. It would be cool to at some point, but I've heard that it's even worse than the music industry in terms of, like, just the pettiness and, like, people, working their ass off and not getting paid or, like, sending their pieces to a big artist and the artist never sends it back or even credits them, and So I'm a little wary of stuff like that. Like it's like, oh man, this is even more shallow than music somehow.
Surprisingly, right?
Like
It's
like
true though.
film and fashion are the only two that are like worse than the music industry. Maybe like influencers. Maybe like you can put like streamers in there. Like I don't know. It's just like I
I
don't
don't
know if I want to
disagree.
go further down into the like skin deep
There's
shit show. You know?
it's all for discussion. You know what? I find that people are so concerned to talk about these things. Everyone experiences these things, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, we know people in all these creative industries. Everyone fucking experiences it, but no one wants to state the obvious, which shouldn't be controversial, to your point. That in fashion, for example, people don't return pieces. You have these huge issues. Music, I've always heard from any of my musician friends, it's like if there was one industry, I love music, right? They'll preface by saying, we love what we do, but the industry is to be avoided at all costs, which I probably think is possible maybe nowadays, remaining, as independent as possible. I don't know. Could you speak to that a little bit, just your opinion of the music industry? Because I think a lot of people do have a lot of, it's a give and take, constantly.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. In general, I guess the pessimistic side of me says that like every year goes by, I have less faith in the music industry, but more faith in my friends and I. Like
Absolutely.
it's like, oh man, I'm gonna do this again and like put out another record, but like I'm so excited about the songs and like the creative part. And I finally feel that after years of working, it's like I've built up the skills I've been wanting to like be able to make the thing that I've wanted to do. And that takes a long time. And I'm always learning every day and every song, right? It's like a never ending journey. And that's really inspiring and exciting, and like the possibilities of like someday I could just make an album that's like only an orchestra and like drum machines, like I've
Absolutely.
got all these like crazy ideas, or making an album that sounds like more like Sparkle Horse, like a real like sad songwriter album. It's like I have all these like things on my musical bucket list. So it's like I want to see those through, right? But it can be frustrating. I mean, luckily, like we work with a local New York label run by a great musician named Michael Cadnar, Silent Pendulum Records. Shout out. And he got us linked with, our current team of other people we're working with. And, like this booking agent we're going to start working with, he booked my old band, and he's like been in the scene forever. And it's like, so all these people I can like sit down and have like a drink with and like be frank with. And
Yes.
they can be upfront with me about stuff. And I think it's like, that I guess it is the music industry, but it's definitely like they're doing it from a more humanitarian, artistic point of view. So there are good people, and I think
Absolutely.
it's tricky to maybe find them. And there's a lot of people who want to like take your money or scam you or whatever. But I think if you're involved in like your local scene in your city, there's cool people. I mean, having even just toured a little bit so far, in every city we went through, there was like a cool goth underground and really nice people and fans of music, talented artists, promoters that like just want to make cool things happen in their city. So that on the flip side, there's that.
Absolutely. No, and I totally agree with you. It's finding the right people, because you have to separate, again, the people who are really true artists. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're describing, from the broader industry at large. Because it was a topic that's even come up on my past podcast repeatedly, from people of all genres, right? Post
Yeah.
hardcore,
Mhm.
even the pop scene. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting. I think it's good for people to hear you say that. So I want to segue based on that into touring and performing, because you mentioned, upcoming shows. And I want to know about what some of those shows people can come to expect. But you just toured with Light Asylum,
Yeah.
and
So, okay. Yeah.
but no, please go ahead.
Yeah, so that was awesome. We did an East Coast run. We actually have a show with her and Ronnie Stone a couple weeks in New York on the 26th, which is the night before Thanksgiving. So if you're in the Friendsgiving thing where you're not getting out of the city, come hang out with us in New York. But the big thing is there are plans to do a really long tour in the spring, like 20 days or something. So that would be West Coast through Midwest through almost back east. So I can't say that much more about that right now because it's like cooking, but that's sort of the big thing we're working towards. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, people have that to look forward to, and I wanna touch back in that case on themes and identity, in your music specifically, because I read that postpunk.com said, for example, your music fuses raw emotion and cold machinery, and that was something we talked about at the beginning of the conversation. But, like, even when I was listening to your music, like, as a whole, I was instantly like there's a sense of adrenaline to your music that I don't particularly hear. It's like, when you find a band, this is just me speaking personally, and it just resonates with you instantly. And I was just on Spotify on fucking repeat, and I was thinking to myself,
Thanks.
yes, of course, but I just wonder because a lot of people that I even showed your music to had that same, I guess you could say, kind of visceral reaction. What keeps that duality exciting for you? Because I feel like it's almost lightning in a bottle, and I know this is vague the way that I'm kind of putting this to you, but what that excitement comes from somewhere. I think that's what I'm trying to articulate. Where does that come from? Because it's apparent.
I mean, I don't know. Like, it's weird because as a songwriter and, you're like, "Why am I like this?" Or like, "Why do I" mean, I just think I have a lot of, like I'm, like, a sensitive person and, like, a lot of stuff bothers me, and I feel, like, a lot of weight and anxiety a lot, and this is my way of, like, expressing it, and there is, like, a intensity to it for sure, and some people don't fuck with it for that reason, which is fine. It's like I realize that sometimes it's, like, pretty extra, but it's it's hard to say, you, like, look down to the bottom of the well and, there's, like, not really, like, an answer, it's I think it's just something that drives me and, I think it's also some of it's like a chip on my shoulder, like I wanna prove myself and, some of it's like, the rejection of the music industry for years, you're like, "I'm gonna show them," it's just like
Yeah, of
this,
course.
bitter this bitter, like, "fuck you" attitude, which is definitely, like, a part of me, and I think, like, the healthiest way to deal with that is putting it into something creative rather than, like, crashing out or posting a bunch of bullshit on the internet or like, being self-destructive or any other like number of alternatives. Like the best way to deal with it is to like create something out of it. And a part of it is also like, I don't want to let people down if they liked the first album and the second album. Not that I'm like compromising anything, but almost the reverse. It's like, I don't want to like have someone hear the third album that I'm working on and be like, oh man, they really fell off or they really like, got soft or like they didn't go the distance with their songwriting because you do have to make something at your limit. You have to like dig into yourself. It has to be uncomfortable. It has to be like you're pushing yourself. It has to be, otherwise you're not doing the job. It's just, you're not, you're like phoning it in. And I think anyone who really engages with it knows how like psychically draining it is and how even though you want it to make you feel better, sometimes it doesn't because you're like marinating in that.
Yeah,
Especially when you're making darker stuff, you're like forcing yourself to focus on that. You're like repeating these lyrics like a mantra into the microphone for hours. It like, also, part of growing as a person is like knowing how to leave that in its place and not let it like spill over too much. And so like, when I was younger, that was really hard.
I totally get it. No, I do. I do. I understand that, of course, and the angst. And as you get older, trying to suppress that in your work, whatever it may be. That's interesting. Kind of in the conclusion of our conversation, I have a few questions touching exactly from that because speaking to your favorite track to perform live, when we talk about this raw intensity and emotion, what is your favorite track to perform live?
I mean, because of the like audience reaction and also just like probably Destroy from the first album.
Mhm.
It's just like heavy industrial song about fucking. There's like zero subtlety. Like also Heavy Halo is not a subtle band. That was like a very conscious decision. In my prior project, like either because of fear or just different like artistic priorities, I wrote a lot more abstractly, having studied poetry and things like this, a lot more metaphorical. And I got really frustrated because a lot of people were like, I don't understand what your lyrics are about, or like whatever. Or like you're being weird to be weird on purpose, which I wasn't. It just was kind of from a different mindset. So
Sure.
so I was like, another thing speaking to Black Flag, I was like, how do you write direct lyrics without them being corny? And the answer is you sort of have to convey the like brutal truth of reality, because I think as long as you're real, it's not gonna be cheesy because, as long as you convey the complexity of and the vulgarity of the situation. And so that song was definitely, like, born out of that, and, I definitely, like, throw my guitar down and roll around on the ground and get in people's faces and give them the mic and do the
Yeah,
whole post-hardcore thing, I guess you could say. So that's always, like, a fun one. So that's probably my favorite to do live, but going forward, I don't know, when we introduce some new songs into the set, it's sorta hard to say.
fair enough. So, yeah, speaking to that, going forward, what do you want Heavy Halo to represent to the alt industrial scene?
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting now is I think it's a really good time for the alt industrial scene. There's a lot of incredible bands that are operating almost at this level of like almost crossing over
Mhm.
into the mainstream. Like you have a band like Pixel Grip, who I played a couple shows with playing guitar with Cody Pop. Like they're incredible. And that album, like those songs are like fucking bangers. And like Travis Scott sampled one of their songs without permission, and they ended up getting compensated for that and the credit and all this. But it's interesting because those sounds are like almost there, or a band like
Mhm.
Health, or a band like
Yep.
Patriarchy, or a band like Youth Code. So it's hard to really say like how far that will go because there's still like a transgressive element, and a lot of these bands are still pretty idiosyncratic and unusual. It's like hard to say like whether there would ever be a moment like the 90s alternative rock. I mean, I dream of that. I
Yeah.
dream of so every time there's a turnstile or like a Deftones getting bigger, it's like I'm always like fucking psyched, or a Scowl or any of these bands, right? It like feels like it's, almost on the tipping point. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess I would hope that like we have our own unique, and also the cool thing about all these bands is they all sound different, right? But a lot of people who are fans of like one of those bands would like a lot of the other, even though they don't, yeah, one to one, they're not like super similar sounding. It's more of an attitude. It's more of like a perspective. It's like, it's this kind of underdog grit. It's the opposite of poptimism. I mean, you've heard that term, right? So there was this like huge shift in like music journalism, especially in the past decade, because people were like, "Oh, like, music critics only favor like old school rock, like Nirvana and Bob Dylan, and maybe we need to look at things like R&B and hip hop and pop and, not just talk down about them or whatever." Which is like, a good idea in theory and a bit in practice, but it got to the point where like you have all these major blogs that aren't even writing about the underground anymore. They're just writing about the Kanye album and the Katy Perry album, and, that's driving them clicks and ad revenue for sure. But it's, you're not really like covering like a wide range of music or like really doing anything to move the needle. Like you're just throwing flowers to artists that are already massively popular, right? And so that was like a huge dominant force. And I think for a while, like especially guitar music was like pretty unpopular. And now I think people are like coming back around to that. And to me, like industrial and alternative music is like the perfect marriage of like, the ethos of something like grunge, but with a more like futuristic and forward looking sound palette. So to me, there's like infinite potential or a lot of potential. And so I guess I hope that we would like contribute our own little brand of what that is to the scene.
I love that. I love that. Perfect. And so that brings us to our final question, of course, which you touched on a little bit about what you could say and couldn't say earlier. But 2026, what's next for Heavy Halo? What do people have to look forward to?
Yeah, so we have a big tour coming up in March. We have a remix coming out in December. We did a remix for Andy Bell of Erasure, which will be cool. That's coming out in December, I think December 12th or something. And yeah, and we're also pretty far along on album 3. So, definitely staying busy in this little gap before this next tour. So hopefully new material at some point. But that's probably going to take a little while to finish cooking.
Well, McKeever, this has been an awesome conversation. I seriously
Thanks so
mean
much.
that. And
Really interesting questions for sure.
well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. I think basically I'm looking forward to all your new music that's coming out, and it's just really exciting to see everything that y'all have done so far. So, thank you for being here. Absolutely,
And thanks so much.
of course.